Hello and welcome to RadioTimes.com's Doctor Who video review, where we'll be unpacking the show's spectacular Centenary special, The Power of the Doctor. I'm Morgan, RadioTimes.com's executive editor.
And I'm Huw, I'm a commissioning editor on Radio Times magazine.
Now, there is a lot to unpack here, and fair warning, we will be delving into spoilers. I guess we should start here by talking about the centenary of it all when it comes to Jodie Whittaker's swan song. We can talk about it now.
Yeah, it's true. The secret's out. Lord Reith is the master. Nobody saw it coming. I was surprised. But it was. I think it really spoke to the character. Mm-hmm. No, that didn't really happen. I kind of wish it had now.
Pretty much everything else happened, though, that you possibly could have conceived of.
Yeah. No, I think the centenary of it all was quite good, because this originally wasn't going to be a centenary episode. That was sort of added in later. But they kind of did it in quite a Doctor Who-y way by bringing back all these elements, the costume elements, you know, the recorder, the celery and all that stuff. And then also, obviously, the kind of group therapy sesh at the end, as well as Ace and Tegan being in it. So yeah, I think they did a lot, really. Yeah,
the companion support group. Yeah. It's interesting the way they built up those Easter eggs, because you start off with, the Master becoming the Doctor and almost cosplaying as the Doctor, wearing the Seventh Doctor's vest, and as you say, tooting on the recorder. But then they just go all out and brought back. There had definitely been some rumblings, I think, rumours about classic companions coming back, but I don't think anyone necessarily expected the return of classic Doctors.
No, I was really surprised, honestly. I mean, I kind of felt like through the rumour mill, I'd probably heard most of what was going to be in this episode, but actually, we got David Bradley was back, obviously Sylvester McCoy, Peter Davison, Paul McGann. I've got to say, not to break through, when we watched this in the screening and Paul McGann turned up, Morgan started clapping just on his own.
I did, and it just me, and it was entirely involuntary as well. It was I didn't mean to clap. I was so happy to see the Eighth Doctor back that I just started clapping. I don't know why that one hit me more than the others. I think because, we had Night of the Doctor, but that was a mini-sode. This was Paul McGann back in bona fide Doctor Who, and to see that, and to see him recognised alongside the other classic Doctors, really excited me. I hadn't necessarily expected to see him again, so that one really hit home for me.
Yeah, I think it was really cool, and it was nice as well because obviously Sylvester and Peter got a bit more of a moment later on in the episode, which I'm sure we'll get to. But it was nice that he had his moment along with David Bradley, kind of in the sun there, and with obviously with Colin Baker as well, who we hadn't mentioned. We shouldn't forget. It was quite a gang. Quite a gang. I was sort of wondering if they were going to bring back more and more, but I think Chris Chibnall said afterwards at the Q&A we were at that they kind of wanted to not go too far into what's planned for the 60th, and even if they don't know what's planned. For example, bringing David Tennant back might be a bit of a...
It would have undercut what's to come, potentially. Yeah. No, we should touch on those scenes between the Fifth Doctor and Tegan, well, sort of the Fifth Doctor, and the Seventh Doctor and Ace. As you say, they kind of break away and get those specific scenes with their companions, which I thought were really, really nice. Yeah, the returns of Tegan and Ace, I actually thought were handled really well in this episode. They were integrated really well. But the scenes where they really work are where they're reunited with their old Doctors, and you get to touch on stuff that, I'll be honest, I didn't think we would touch on in a Doctor Who Centenary special.
Well, Adric.
The fact that Adric gets a shout out in an episode of Doctor Who that's celebrating 100 years of the BBC. It's there's going to be a lot of eyes on this. I love you get an Adric shout out in there. But that was a really, really touching moment, and although it is ridiculous, I also feel like to have not touched on that's what Tegan would be going through and thinking about when she's reunited with the Cybermen. I thought that was really nice, but especially the Seventh Doctor and Ace reunion, particularly given that we never found out. I mean, I know there's been all manner of exits for Ace in books and in audio plays and comics, but actually we've never had that addressed on TV. So she's just back now, and to have that addressed, I mean, we don't get the details, but we do find out there was some kind of falling out between the two of them, and to have them reconcile was really, really nice.
Definitely, and I thought it was interesting because we've had classic companions come back and talk to whoever the incumbent Doctor was as their Doctor, and that's nice. But I feel like it just hit differently. Like obviously, Jodie had already met them earlier in the episode, and that was nice. But then when it suddenly, I don't know, just had this sort of depth to it and this kind of weight, which I think was really nice. And it just felt different, It felt like something we hadn't seen in the modern series, which is hard to do by this stage. So fair play to them for that.
Yeah. Well. And then on companions, we should talk about, as you mentioned, almost like a companion support group that Graham sets up, and it's one of the final scenes, and we see alongside Tegan and Ace and Dan and Graham and Yaz, other classic series companions. What did you make of that scene?
I thought that was really nice. To be honest, I think I can say this now. I knew about this for a while because John Bishop told me that he'd worked with Bonnie Langford in the final episode about a year ago. So I knew she was coming back. But no, I thought it was a nice way of doing it. I kind of wish there'd been more of it, to be honest. I thought that you could do a whole, episode about a Doctor Who, companion support group.
Yeah.
I kind of thought it was really nice, and I liked the mix of companions they had. I wouldn't have minded having like a Martha or something in there, just like to nod to, it's kind of just Jodie Whittaker era and then classic era. Do you know what I mean? I feel like it'd be nice if there was someone in between, but I thought it was really sweet.
Yeah, and I think having Bonnie Langford in there is a smart move. I think having Jo Grant is an all-time classic, but for me, the one that really set it above the top was William Russell.
Yeah,
having William Russell back, and it just felt like a really nice nod to the origins, the beginnings of the show, to have Ian Chesterton in there. It's something that fans have talked about for a long, long time. And okay, it's essentially a cameo. He only has like one line, but just to have him in there, I thought was really special.
And when it's supposed to be a centenary special, it's supposed to be about 100 years. Doctor Who's been around for 60 of those 100 years. Well, not quite, but almost. It's like you want someone from that very start. And I think David Bradley playing, William Hartnell's Doctor nods to that, but having William Russell in there is like, that is just perfect.
Yeah, and having Ian find out about regeneration, which is something that he'd never.
True.
He's like, sorry, what? I loved that moment. So for me, that was what really, really worked in The Power of the Doctor, was the centenary side of it all, the celebratory side of it all, the Easter eggs. All of that was a lot of fun.
Yeah, and it's funny because that is the stuff that was added in later from what we understand about the production. I mean, not later, like obviously they knew what was happening when they filmed it, but the original plan, as far as we know, would have been for this to air earlier in the year, and it would have just been, I assume, the Master's plan to, get rid of the Doctor and all that.
The Master's Dalek plan.
The Master's Dalek plan. I love that. I mean, we've been making that joke for years, so it's funny that the show finally picked it up.
Yeah, but. So that's one side of what this episode had to accomplish, which was the celebratory aspect, the centenary aspect. But the other thing has to do, no small task, is to round off the Chris Chibnall era of Doctor Who, to write out the 13th Doctor, to write out her companions. How do you feel the episode fared on that side of things?
It's interesting, isn't it? Because I was thinking about this in terms of like the thing you can most compare this to, obviously, is The Day of the Doctor, and that wasn't Matt Smith's exit episode. That did all that stuff, and then he had a separate episode that was his exit. So I think it was quite a lot to cram in. I thought it was like, there were definitely bits of it I liked a lot of. I liked the Doctor and Yaz's kind of final moments, and I feel like it was, a fairly good goodbye to the character. But I don't know, it didn't quite hit for me in terms of, it didn't feel like the grand summing up of the Jodie Whittaker era that I was sort of hoping for. Like it didn't really, not that it needs to wrap up every sort of loose thing, but it kind of felt like the way that she died in the end was quite, like she was just being quite reactive to, she just gets killed by the Master.
Yeah.
And then she doesn't do some sort of big moment of self-sacrifice. It's not like she's trying to save Yaz, which I think would have worked, or she's doing something to save people. It's just the Master just kills her at the end and then she goes off and regenerates. I don't know, it's tricky because I think it's been such a weird period for Doctor Who. We've had the shorter series, we've had lots of long gaps. I feel like maybe the momentum hasn't been there for me to kind of build up to Jodie's exit, but I don't know. I mean, obviously, we should say as well, we haven't seen exactly how the episode ends because at our screening they cut off the very last few moments.
Yeah, if you're wondering why aren't you talking about the amazing final scenes, it's because we haven't seen them. Because the screeners and screenings that were made available to press, they cut off the final few minutes. So was it any good? Let us know in the comments below.
That was, we really dipped right after that point. No, I think we got a good sense because we see Jodie's final words and all that stuff. I don't know. It might be one of those things I'd have to watch it back again and maybe look back on, with the benefit of hindsight. Once we're finally, this era's sort of closed off, it might be easier. But I'm not sure. I'm not quite sure what the sort of. I feel like I know what the story of some of the other modern Doctors certainly's era was. Like with Matt Smith's sort of arc and David Tennant's arc and Peter Capaldi's arc. I'm not quite sure what the story of Jodie's arc is, if you know what I mean.
And I think you're right in that sense of momentum wasn't quite there in the way it was maybe for the 10th Doctor or the 12th Doctor or any of those. I think partially because of COVID, the way it impacted. I think the fact that the Centenary came in and they had to insert an extra special, which I think was Legend of the Sea Devils, which they weren't expecting, and it would have gone straight from Eve of the Daleks potentially to the original version of this.
But then also Eve of the Daleks was a drop-in because they couldn't make the episode they had planned, so they had to write it in a week, right? And do it under COVID conditions, which is why it's so compressed. And I love that episode.
It was great.
But God knows, like it's all been kind of like up in the air and going around this whole last era, I suppose.
And I think as well, I think there may be some negative reaction to the fact that, as you say, not every story strand is tied up in a neat little knot. So actually, think of a lot of what fans might consider paramount to the Chibnall era. Things like the timeless child isn't even referenced,
Not
really.
once,
The fugitive doctor does appear, but in such a way that doesn't really touch on the sort of where that character falls in the canon. A lot of the ideas that were brought up in Flux, like the multiverse, the Doctor's origins, none of that's really touched on here.
Yeah, she doesn't get that watch out of the TARDIS.
No, and look, Doctor Who's going to continue, right?
I hope so.
Yeah, the watch in the TARDIS. I'd forgotten about that. Yeah, no, Doctor Who's going to continue.
So did the Doctor.
And there's going to be ample opportunity to pick up on these threads at a later date, a much later date potentially, if Russell or even who comes after him as showrunner wants to. It's an ongoing story, but I think some people will question the fact that those story arcs aren't paid off. I think as a big epic showcase for Jodie Whittaker's Doctor, I think this episode works and it gives her a lot of great material. But in terms of that story arc side of things, I don't know if it works quite as well.
Yeah, I agree. I thought it would probably kind of be the defining closing statement of Chris Chibnall's era and what he wanted to do with the show. And I'm not quite sure after watching it what that was. So I don't know. Maybe it was there and I just didn't see it. But I don't know. That in of itself is, I guess, something to think about.
And John Bishop as Dan, he came in Flux, was really warmly received, I think, by the fan base. Fans have really taken to Dan. And again, for me, it's a juggling act, right? Because there's so much to do in this episode.
I think it would have been impossible to give Dan... The way they did it was actually quite strange in that he's in it at the beginning having an adventure and then he has his like goodbye episode in like a 5-minute burst where he's like, oh, actually I'm going to go now, goodbye, forever. But he's not in the rest of the episode, but he just comes back in the end. It's like he left in the last episode, but they had to delay it to this one, if you know what I mean.
I think the way in which he's written out, I didn't have any issues with. No. I totally buy that of his character. There were sort of hints towards that before where he was like having a love interest on Earth, and it was like, oh, is he going to stick around? Is he going to continue to travel? And so him just saying, do you know what, I've had a near-death experience. And actually, it's a really interesting way to write out a companion. Is, do you know what, this time, I soared a little too close to the sun, and I'm going to step off now before I really land myself in trouble. I think it works as a companion exit. I think it works as Dan's exit particularly. It was just the fact that it happens in like the first 10 minutes of this episode, and then he's gone. And for such a popular character, it couldn't help but feel a little rushed for me.
Yeah, I feel like that's one of the ones where I don't really begrudge them that, because I feel like that was a necessity of this episode, is to get Dan out of the way almost. I can't really imagine a way in which you could get rid of him at the point they needed him to be gone in a way that would have worked better, if you know what I mean. So unless they dropped him in an earlier episode, or if he was there for the whole time, maybe that would have worked. But then I don't know. Then you've just got to start thinking of how the rest of that unpicks. Yeah. And it's like, how does that? But then he'd be there, and you pull a thread and it all unravels. Yeah. So I don't know. I know what you mean. It felt almost weird. It was like he'd come back too soon. When he comes back at the end with Graham, it's like, well, he was only here like an hour ago. Basically, Dan just sat out one mission. And that's it. And he just left early.
And what about the way in which Yaz is written out as well, Mandip Gill, because that was, she's the only companion I think who's now travelled with a Doctor for their entire run. You've had the ones that have come close, like Jamie with the second Doctor, but he came in on his second story. And obviously there's another layer to this, which is fans are really invested in the Doctor's relationship with Yaz, and that was sort of touched upon in previous episodes. How do you feel that was resolved?
Well, it's interesting, isn't it? Because we talked a bit about Sea Devils being added in, and it felt a bit like where Sea Devils left off, it didn't really pick up that kind of romantic side of it again, which I would have expected it to in some way. I mean, there's sort of, hints to it. But the thing I don't really understand actually at the end is the Doctor's like, oh, I need to be on my own now. And Yaz is like, all right. And it's sort of presented as like, oh yeah, well, that's Yaz done with the Doctor forever then. Do you know what I mean? It's like, well, presumably the Doctor could still go and visit her afterwards. Like, she didn't really have a reason to leave beyond, well, the Doctor's regenerating now. I mean, I guess the idea is that she loves this Doctor and wouldn't necessarily like another one, but you feel like you'd want to
Shallow.
Yeah, I know, right? You feel like you'd want to see that.
Yeah.
I don't know. So it felt a little bit like her being moved off the board because that's the time she needs to be moved off the board.
Yeah, I would agree. I think we talked about this previously, didn't we, in our Doctor Who podcast? Still available to download.
R.I.P.
Which, where we said, Yaz is so invested in the Doctor, so in love with the Doctor. Other than getting killed off, why would she ever leave? And for me, this episode didn't quite, land on a satisfactory answer to that. It felt as though, as you say, we had just reached that point in the story. The Doctor said, "I'm regenerating now. You have to leave," and Yaz was just like, "Yeah, sure, okay."
Yeah.
And I didn't really buy into that. Even if
I don't think Yaz would leave the Doctor. At that point, no.
Even if the moment of regeneration, the Doctor needs to be alone, what is to stop the next Doctor just going back and picking Yaz up again? And actually,
I think the thing is, it's not that the Doctor would do that, because you could imagine a reason the Doctor wouldn't do that. But I can't imagine Yaz taking it so meekly and also taking it as like, this is definitely what's going to happen, and I'm okay with that.
Yeah, you're right. The Doctor sidelining Yaz and saying, "You need to leave now," fine.
Yeah.
But yeah, Yaz not fighting back against that. And there's sort of a sense in the final scene, or the final scene with Yaz, that she's going to be okay and she's outgrown the Doctor. But I don't feel like the episode really built to that.
It felt like kind of the whole thing is she's desperately trying to get the Doctor back against all costs, which is interesting. And that's kind of been her arc the last few episodes, ever since Revolution of the Daleks in some ways. And yeah, I'm not quite sure where that went at the end. Like, she's sort of just like, "Oh well, guess you're gonna die.
Yeah.
Cheerio." And it just felt a bit abrupt for me.
Yeah.
Also, I do feel that, and this may be a controversial thing, but I feel like I was surprised they didn't kind of address the Yaz Doctor relationship after the last two episodes really kind of built it up step by step, kind of not out of nowhere, but like it had been very much subtext before that. Then to just not touch on it again, like I don't feel like it was covered off in Sea Devils, because maybe that's what they thought, but I feel like that wasn't the definitive statement on it.
No, and I think the exit that was afforded to Yaz could have been any companion's exit, just this idea of, "I'm regenerating, so you have to leave." It didn't feel specific to their relationship, which does have that romantic element to it. And I think if you think of maybe the closest equivalent, if the 10th Doctor and Rose, the 10th Doctor had just gone, "I'm regenerating, Rose, you have to leave," and there was no payoff to to that romantic tension, I think it would have felt strange. And I think it feels strange here for the same reasons, that it's not really directly addressed the specific nature of their relationship.
Yeah, I do really like the kind of last image of them having the ice creams on the roof of the TARDIS.
Yes.
I think that's very nice.
Yeah.
And that felt kind of like it was approaching something.
It's their last date, almost.
Yeah. And I think there was something, when you think about the Doctor and Yaz, it's very sad, because they're never really happy together at any point. Like, it's just constantly Yaz like being like, lovelorn, and the Doctor being like stressed and awkward about the fact that that's happening.
Or either totally ignorant or that.
Yeah. And there's constantly just like, they never seem to actually have any fun. So
I'm sure they do off screen.
Yeah. On the Big Finish audio dramas, coming soon. But I don't know. I think, I'm not sure how you could have ended it. Like we said, I just don't think there was any way, bar killing Yaz off, that would have made it work, and then that wouldn't have worked either.
No, definitely.
So I think it's tricky, isn't it? The character dynamics as they were, sometimes you kind of just have to, like the Doctor drops, Sarah Jane off in Aberdeen, whatever, and never picks her up again. It's like, that doesn't really make sense, but we'll make up a reason later for why that happens. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So maybe in the future it'll all tie together.
Maybe. So I think overall where we're landing is, this episode, parts of it worked, parts of it didn't. For me, it was the celebratory aspect of it that really, really worked. And, I came away from that 90 minutes, or, just shy, thinking, that was a lot of fun. I really enjoyed myself there. I came out of the screening when we saw it with a big smile on my face. Definitely. I loved seeing the old Doctors and the old companions. I loved all the nods to the past. Sacha Dhawan as the Master, just another fantastic performance.
I was going to say, that's the third element, that's the other element for me, which we haven't touched on.
Yeah.
Sacha was brilliant.
Yeah, absolutely fantastic performance. If that is to be his exit from the show as well, thought he was terrific. But then as an episode that had to put a cap on the whole 13 era, for me, didn't work quite as well.
Yeah, I think it's really difficult. When you think if you think of regeneration episodes, if modern Doctor Who, they're all usually a bit bad. I mean, like Twice Upon a Time.
That is a controversial statement.
Well, this is like when I said all the Christmas specials are bad and everyone
Yeah.
gave me hate, but I'm just going to say it. Twice Upon a Time, I think it's been reassessed a bit, but I think at the time it was considered this isn't that great.
Yeah, it did get a bit of stick at the time. I
Yeah.
quite liked Twice Upon a Time. But
Yeah, but Time of the Doctor, I rewatched that a couple of years ago, and actually I liked it a lot more. But at the time, I thought, watching as a fan, I thought this is rubbish. I think The End of Time again is like good, but it's not as good as other Tennant stuff. At the time, I was like, this isn't as good as other series finales.
I don't know if you could say that they're all bad, but I think you could definitely say that very rarely are they that Doctor's best episode, except you can maybe make an argument for Parting of the Ways.
Well, that's the thing. But the thing is, that is like, I think that first series is so different because it's so much like a closed arc, and it is like, it works because you've got a Doctor leaving in the series, which we haven't actually had since. I mean, we almost did with Peter Capaldi, but then they added a bit on. With Twice Upon a Time, where he sort of is just regenerating but wandering around fine. For like
regenerating for like 2 hours.
Yeah. But yeah, so I think it's a difficult one because you've kind of got to do a lot. You've got to make it an entertaining episode.
Yeah.
You've got to, cross off all these characters, all these dynamics, and you've got to kind of give the Doctor a big moment to exit. And I don't know. I think some of that was accomplished by this, and some of it wasn't. The fact that they threw in the Centenary element. There is a reason that Matt Smith's final episode wasn't the Day of the Doctor. Do you know what I mean? Like, they needed to give him that extra thing. I think maybe, you never know what would have happened, but I feel like they could have done the Centenary episode and then an exit, and that might have worked a bit better, but who knows?
If Matt Smith had left at the end of Day of the Doctor, you would have been like, well, that was a great episode, but that didn't feel like his exit, and possibly much the same here. And this episode did have to do more than any other episode, arguably, in New Who history.
Yeah.
Where, had to write out a Doctor, had to write out the Master, or an incarnation of the Master, had to write out 2 companions, had to again, tackle that celebratory aspect and bring back old Doctors and old companions.
Bring back Graham.
Bring back Graham. Plus, he's just hanging around at the bottom of a volcano. It had a lot to do. So, maybe not a huge surprise that some bits worked better than others. I feel like this episode might initially get quite a positive reaction from all the nods to the past and the Easter eggs. And then when people have a bit of distance from it, they may think, oh, okay, this didn't quite work as well as I would have wanted. But what did you think about the power of the Doctor? Are we entirely off base? Did you hate all the Easter eggs and classic Doctors, classic companions, not for you?
Who needs them?
And you thought that it was a perfect send-off for the 13th Doctor. If you're watching on YouTube, let us know in the comments below, or you can at us on Twitter at Radio Times. I've been Morgan.
I've been Huw.
And thank you for watching. See you at the 60th.